Malcolm X, Sam Cooke, Muhammad Ali, and Jim Brown. That is a room full of stars, but the biggest star here may just be Regina King. Let's talk about it. What is up, Flick fans? Welcome back to my channel. Amazon Prime is releasing One Night in Miami this Friday. It's already been in select theaters, and I actually saw this movie about 2 months back at a film festival. I just rewatched it for this review. I can't wait to talk about it, but I need you guys down below. Are you excited for this film to finally see the movie that everybody's been talking about? Let's do it. So, this is a fictional account of one incredible night where icons, Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, Sam Cooke, Jim Brown, all gather to discuss their roles in the civil rights movement and cultural upheaval of the 60s. So I talked about Regina King, but before we go anywhere, I want to mention a name, and often in a movie or a show like this, we don't give the writers as much credit as I believe they deserve, and in this case, Kemp Powers, who not only wrote Soul, you guys know my favorite movie from last year, he wrote the screenplay for this film, and that is what drives the movie. Regina King does a great job with her direction. I do believe there are certain elements from keeping this movie maybe as good as what I had heard going in, but Kemp Powers does a great job with the dialogue, and the 4 stars at the forefront, they are what drive this film, but his writing is what keeps it fluid. Now let's talk about those 4 stars. Leslie Odom Jr. as Sam Cooke, Aldous Hodge, who I'm a huge fan of, just got announced as Hawkman, as Jim Brown, Eli Gore as Cassius Clay, a.k.a. Muhammad Ali, and the star of the show, I believe, Kingsley Ben-Adir. Now, when it comes to Oscar chances, I think Leslie Odom Jr. has a better chance as Sam Cooke, just because probably the consistency throughout the film. But there's one moment in particular that made me appreciate Kingsley Ben-Adir's performance, maybe even more so than any of them. It was powerful, it was hard-hitting, it was moving, and that conversation, I won't get into it too far, is the driving force behind the film. What these men have been going through at this point in time has all kind of built up, and this conversation, well, numerous conversations, but this gathering of the 4 is when it's all kind of laid out on the table, talked about, discussed, and it really is a very important insight into what these men were going through, and the fact that they're all looked up to as icons, leaders, individuals that are in charge of this movement or will lead us through this movement. And I could not think of a better cast, writer, director, team-up combination to take us through this story. Now, I will bring up my one big flaw with this film, and that is the fact that it is based on a stage play. And often when we get a film like this, there were actually a few examples earlier in the year, in 2020, where we got movies based off plays, and there was something about it that didn't quite feel as maybe cinematic. Now, we've seen the opposite effect, where we get a film based on a play that feels incredibly cinematic. And even though I love King's direction and the way that she puts these puzzle pieces together, and by the end of the film, we have this emotional response that I think it's trying to convey, doesn't quite get there in the first act or two, but by the time we get to the end, we're feeling exactly what she wants us to feel. So she does a great job, and I think when it comes to an Oscar nomination, her name will be in the cards, especially when you look at screenplay, but even for direction. I think she's going to get nominated for Best Director, and for good reason. This is a difficult thing to adapt. But my personal issue with the film is that maybe I wanted a bit more from that. Maybe I wanted that emotional impact to be amplified by the end. And if we would have gotten that cinematic feel that I feel like we were missing, and I don't know exactly who or what to fault here, then I think I would have been much more impacted than I already was from the great acting, cast, and screenplay. So it's not that I have a huge issue with any of those things. It's once they all come together, they create a good and fulfilling experience. But for me, I can't quite get it to that level of great because there is a piece somewhere that was just missing. I think the ultimate thing to say there is we have the material. There's not much more I guess you can do with it. I do wish they would have pushed the boundaries a bit because we've seen so many similar, I use the word familiar movies before. This doesn't necessarily stand out from the crowd in that regard, but when you peel back the layers and look at the dialogue, yeah, it's extremely well written, and you have some great performances. I also just love how we can watch this movie and look at when things were a bit simpler. Obviously, we're dealing with the 1960s here, but this film shows us some beautiful conversations between men who had very different methods of trying to improve their way of life. But at the end of the day, they could come together and just talk about it, have a conversation. It's calming to see individuals talk something out, and even though they're trying to accomplish the same mission, they all have a different mentality, and they're all trying to approach it in a different way. But instead of arguments and yelling, and we get a little bit of that in this movie, sometimes you can get overly aggressive when you're trying to prove a point, it's just easy to talk through your issues. And how often do we see that in 2020 and 2021? I've not seen much of it, to be honest with you. And from that, we get beautiful insight, strong monologues, very strong monologues, and the slight exploration of their lives prior. We get flashback scenes, and the integration of those flashback scenes were solid. It's edited together extremely well. So before I give you guys my score, thank you so much. If you enjoy these reviews, doing them every single week and weekend, drop a thumbs up, leave your comments. One Night in Miami runs solely through great direction and our core four, and their performances are electric and on point. I'm so excited to see where Regina King goes from here behind the camera. My score is a 74% for One Night in Miami. Again, the Oscar chances, they're pretty large. I feel a nomination for director Leslie Odom Jr. I would love to see one for Kingsley Ben-Adir. Definitely screenplay, and I feel this may get a Best Picture nod just because of what it's dealing with, the way it was put together, and I thought it all came across in a solid way. Thanks again for watching. WandaVision review coming tomorrow, a little early. All right, guys, I'll see you soon.